Did you ever see the Corbyn surge?
Not as it panned out, no. I mean, I've known Jamie for a long time. I used to work for John McDonnell, the left-wing Labour backbencher. Him and Jamie are something of a double act, I suppose. And he was someone, you know, I guess, because he's such an understated bloke, he's one of the most modest, down-to-earth blokes you'll ever meet. And in that sense, I suppose, I never thought in my head he'd end up being the figurehead for this sort of thing, but partly, as it turns out, that's why he is, because, and it should be about policies, not personality, but the fact he is someone who is down to earth, reasonable, this is all common sense, that sort of approach, and that's partly why he's done so well. But it would be facile to look at this as some sort of just something narrowly happening in Britain. This is to do with the crumbling of social democracy all over Europe, and it's crumbling in lots of different ways, and it's crumbling in favour of right-wing xenophobic movements like UKIP, like the National Front, in favour of civic nationalist movements like the Scottish National Party, which in that case have positioned themselves at least to the anti-austerity left, but also you know, new parties of the populist left, like Syriza in Greece, of course, and Podemos in Spain. And I've often come under a bit of flack, I suppose, from some on the left for this idea, you know, this idea I'm some sort of unreconstructed Labourite, and I suppose I'm not going to try and claim vindication now. I'm not going to do it. I told you so. But what my position was always that if you're going to get some sort of movement which breaks away from the political consensus we've got here and in other countries, it's going to be specific to the kind of political and cultural context of those countries. So, you know, in Ireland, it's manifesting itself through the Republican tradition, through Sinn Féin. In Greece, it's through Syriza, a party which comes from, you know, a tradition which harks back to the Greek Civil War in the 1940s. In Scotland, it's of course manifesting itself through the independence movement, through the Scottish National Party. And in here, in a country where there is no tradition of a mass party of the left to the left of the Labour Party because of the trade union link and our electoral system, I always thought myself that this sort of thing would happen within Labourism. And that's obviously what's happened.
When you say Labourism, I mean, that could just mean, you know, a new party founded by the trade union movement. You've had discussions amongst the RMT, the PCS, for a long time about a new party left. It hasn't got very far, no, but you've always stuck with the Labour Party. You were never really particularly enchanted with that conversation, with that direction, were you?
Well, I was always, in a sense, pragmatic about it in that, you know, the only reason for someone like myself, with the politics I have, for having any association whatsoever with the Labour Party, with seeing it as a potential vehicle for political change, is the fact it does have a trade union link, which gives it some roots in, you know, in an organised way with working people, working class people in their workplaces and their communities and in their lives. If that link was severed, if the unions walked off, then I'd walk off with them, because you just end up with a kind of US Democrat style party overrun by political advisors, rootless in any sense of a movement or community or anything. What my strategy was, and this is what I wrote about before the election, was get Labour elected on the basis it's better to fight a Labour government than to fight a Conservative government. And my view was that if you've got a Labour government that came to power, and there was a big dip, you know, Labour were going to cut lots. There was a 50 billion gap or so in cuts between...
We've been an austerity government.
Of course.
I mean, you've accepted that, yeah.
But there was a 50 billion gap in terms of cuts between a Labour government and a Conservative government, and how many people live in that 50 billion pound gap? How many services? How many jobs, you know? And you know what, we're having the right to strike effectively banned in this country, what remaining social housing flogged off. You could go on. My view was that because they would introduce cuts and policies which would damage the lives of working people in this country, that would open up space for the left, because that's what happened in Greece and Spain. I saw that as a precondition for the rise of the left in those countries, that you had a social democratic government come either to power or in power implementing austerity. That's what the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party did, that's what PASOK did in Greece, and that opened up a space for the left.
It took 5 years for Syriza to become a really serious political force. It's taken Jeremy Corbyn seemingly several months. So what's behind that momentum? Why so quickly? Why now?
Well, it hasn't come out of nowhere. I mean, you know what? You've been active like myself in various movements, and and I'll get mocked for saying this, I'll go all around the country. But I've gone, to all these big meetings all over the country for the last few years, and my impression was they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there was something which was untapped into. And my frustration going to those meetings was that we'd all go, rah, 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 these policies are bad and all the rest of it, but I wouldn't know what to say for them practically. The questions often would be, what do we do practically? I do think that what we're seeing here has to be put in a broader context across Europe, which is of social democracy. It capitulated to austerity, accepted the underlying principles of neoliberalism, clunky word, but privatisation, low taxes on the rich, weak trade unions, all the rest of it. And because of that, it has nothing distinctive to say. New Labour, I could go on all day about New Labour, from the Iraq War to deregulation of the city and accepting the underlying principles of Thatcherism. But, they did have public investment in public services. They did have a minimum wage. They did introduce LGBT rights, devolution, all the rest of it. They have nothing now. They have no coherent policies, no coherent vision. They have these kind of, think tankery, these wonky concepts they throw about, which mean nothing, which are abstract and mean nothing to most people. But there was no social democratic centre-left vision anymore of any relevance, and that's why this in Britain, the vacuum's being filled.
It seems to me actually that what Jeremy Corbyn is saying is not particularly radical. This historically would have been the centre of the Labour Party. The things he's saying aren't that different to what Tony Blair was saying before 1997. I mean, although many of us probably won't remember it, he was saying renationalisation of rail, obviously the introduction of a minimum wage that never achieved by Attlee, constitutional reforms which arguably reside behind the potential breakup of the Union, i.e. devolution to Scotland. That was obviously never Blair's intention. Why have the Blairites gone so far to the right? Because it seems to me they literally have nothing to say. I mean, Burnham could have triangulated, and Cooper, they could have triangulated this pretty well, saying what they're saying, but standing on maybe a £12 an hour minimum wage pitch and renationalising rail. And they would have at least consolidated some of this vote, which has now been hemorrhaged to Corbyn. Is that fair?
Look, this is what's so bizarre. The Labour left, arguably, was at its weakest ever point and is now on the verge of taking over the Labour leadership, possibly. And the only reason that's happened is because the centre-left, ideologically, politically, has collapsed. Because, if you're going to accept austerity on things like LGBT rights, you've had a huge shift because of the struggle of LGBT people, which the Tories accept. On devolution, that's a settlement which everybody accepts. I don't know what else there is for them to say.
If Jeremy Corbyn becomes the next Labour Party leader, what does he have to do in the first month? Because it seems to me that there will be a backlash, maybe even a coup, if not straight away, within the next 6 months or year.
People need to be clear about this because, it's important to have hope and be full of optimism and positivity, and that's what his campaign's all about, hope and optimism and positivity. But people need to know now how difficult it's going to be, and there's still a good chance either Burnham or Cooper will end up triumphing. And the first point I'd make about that is people shouldn't be despondent if that happens, because this has whipped up this grassroots movement which is not going away. Look at Scotland, they lost the independence referendum, but look what's happened. They've transformed politics in Scotland, and you've got this huge politicisation and engagement.
The unique thing you're saying is that Corbyn's offered a direction, I agree with you, a pole of attraction. Were the Labour Party to be led by Yvette Cooper, actually pretty right-wing on things like home affairs, prison...
But the left would be a political force again. That's a really important point.
And within the Labour Party or outside of it?
Both. It'd be this... I mean, this is the thing about this whole...
What kind of organisation, sorry to interrupt, because this is a really key point for a lot of people, what would be the organisation that would hold that together? What would be the architecture?
Well, that's the debate we need to have. Because I think you're quite right. The danger is you mobilise all these people, and if he loses, a lot of people just feel despondent and walk away. And if he does win, it's going to be very, very hard indeed, of course, because a big section of the parliamentary Labour Party in no circumstances are going to accept Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader. First Prime Minister's questions, what's going to happen? Jeremy Corbyn will stand up and the Tory benches will cheer him, kind of intentionally causing mischief as best they can. What are they going to do in the Parliamentary Labour Party when he stands up? And just that one image, imagine that one image and how damaging that could be, and how difficult it will be for him to stand up and oppose what David Cameron's doing with a load of baying Tories almost jeering and cheering him on, with a lack of support behind him. A lot of right-wing MPs will obviously, they'll want to bleed him to death, and the mainstream media, all the mainstream media, and that includes obviously the BBC, would be waging all all-out war against him. It would be like what they did to Ed Miliband times 1,000, probably. So the difference is, with someone like Ed Miliband, is he had no grassroots movement backing him up. You know, there was no, I don't want to be harsh on Ed, but the idea he had this big, great movement full of hope and, you know, egging on Ed Miliband. I mean, he had the Millie fandom on Twitter, but let's be realistic here. The difference is there was a big grassroots movement being built, and you've seen in Scotland what happened. They had a campaign of fear, the Better Together campaign, and they threw everything at them. The result was a lot closer than it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be 70-30, that's what they were projecting. It ended up obviously 45-55, but crucially they managed to politicise the country, despite the fact the mainstream media and big business and the major political parties other than the SNP were throwing everything at them. So I'd say be prepared, and if you're someone who supports this campaign, then you need to, in my opinion, commit to, after September the 12th, being part of a grassroots movement, make it the biggest progressive grassroots movement this country has ever seen. You know, why not aim high, and go to every single community in this country, from Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands, the market towns, the big cities, the countryside, all of those communities, and organise people.
How pluralistic is your vision of this grassroots movement? Because let's say we've got a Cooper leadership at the top of the Labour Party after September, going into next year. Let's say she's the favourite, Tessa Jowell is the Labour candidate for London Mayor. Who would you be backing for the mayoralty next year? Would it be a left candidate who is an independent, or a Green, or a Lib Dem? How flexible are you?
Well, obviously, as soon as you do that, you end up leaving the Labour Party, because if you support a candidate outside the Labour Party, you're instantly, that's it.
So you'd back Tessa Jowell over, say, a Sian Berry, or I can't think of a left-leaning Lib Dem candidate, but there could be one.
I think if Tessa Jowell becomes Labour's candidate for mayor, I think, you know, I think it's fair to say that the grassroots movement you're seeing stirred up by Jeremy Corbyn's campaign, because they're a formidable force now, including in London. Are they going to go out leafleting for Tessa Jowell? I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, she once said she'd throw herself under a bus for Tony Blair.
Some Greens will be watching this, and they'll be saying, Owen Jones has no problem with me voting for a left-leaning Labour candidate for leader, Corbyn, yet he would never throw his hat behind a Green candidate for London Mayor, or a Green candidate for a public position elsewhere, no matter how radical or how fantastic their politics were. They might like you, they might agree with lots of what you've got to say, they might say spot on, but when it comes down to it, he's not flexible enough in his politics, because actually this is the mindset of the old politics. He'll only ever vote for a Labour candidate. Is that a fair assessment?
The problem with that, this is the problem with it, that I would have to abandon entirely my political strategy if I did that, because the whole point of...
So this is just for you? You're not saying to other, this is just for Owen Jones?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've always said this. Whenever I go round, whenever I do... I mean, this is the thing, sometimes people on the left of the Labour Party, they sum up my strategy as being, ooh, vote Labour, as if I've ever gone round the country. I mean, obviously, the run-up to the election, I did lots of stuff, Labour meetings, public meetings, trying to get people to vote Labour, obviously trying to keep the Tories out. But the idea in the anti-austerity movement, I've been going round for the last few years going vote Labour, is just not true. I've never done that. I don't do that. Some people are going to vote Green, some people are going to vote Labour, some people will vote, I don't know, for the Trade Union Socialist Coalition, Left Unity. We've all got different strategies, and we've all got to unite on an issue-by-issue basis, on issues like housing, jobs, wages, peace, all those sorts of things.
But what Corbyn said is he's transcended that. Because he's got a political platform within a party, which you're saying people should vote.
But if someone is part of, if your strategy is, or has been, to try and build a left within the Labour Party, if you support candidates outside the Labour Party, you're instantly expelled. So then you're null and void, your whole strategy's over. So it's a big ask, yeah, I understand the frustrations, because in the Green Party, you can support, you're allowed by the rules of the Green Party to support Jeremy Corbyn and you don't get expelled. That's not the other way, it doesn't work the other way around. So if I were to say...
Would you like those rules changed then?
Yes, I think having a more... I think, look, the whole point of this party, the party system we've got at the moment is anachronistic because of our electoral system, which is first past the post. Why is Jeremy Corbyn and Liz Kendall in the same party? I mean, it is a bit silly, really, isn't it? I mean, there's a bit of a gulf, to say the least, between the two. My own opinion is, if you're on the left or you're someone who wants a different sort of society, follow your own conscience, do whatever you think is best. Personally, this is what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to do it for some years. I think now it is paying off. But if I was now to go around saying, I'm going to go and support the Green candidate for London Mayor, then obviously I would be thrown from Labour and I wouldn't be able to stick to the strategy that I've had. That's just the way things work, and this is the problem with politics. It's not easy, is it? You know, wouldn't it be great to, you know, I'd love it if we were all in the same party and Caroline Lucas was part of it, and me and Mark Sawatka for PCS and Jeremy Corbyn. We're not there yet. I think one day we will all be, but there would have to be a different electoral system in place to allow that to happen. And that's why I support proportional representation. I think it will happen because political structures are disintegrating here and across Europe. That system, which keeps people of very different political dispositions in one party, I think in the next few years is going to break down. But we're not there yet, are we? So,
final question. Somebody's watching this. They weren't a Labour Party member before May. They've just joined as a supporter. They've voted for Corbyn. What one thing would you ask them to do or recommend for them to do that would be politically advantageous for the anti-austerity movement?
When I go to schools and sixth forms, I always recommend people just, if there's just one single issue that you're really passionate about, whether it be tax justice or the environment or a living wage, you know, just throw yourself into one of those campaigns. Just one campaign will change things. And the reason I say that is, look at the Jeremy Corbyn campaign. That has not come out of nowhere. It's come out of all these campaigns over the last few years, from the People's Assembly to UK Uncut. So if you throw yourself into just one single issue campaign, you're helping to politicise other people generally and help contribute to I think, the building of movement which will change society.
Owen, excellent. Thanks very much.
Cheers, mate. No worries.